If I could have everybody please stand. Thank you. Well, it's great to see the buzz because people haven't seen each other for 16 months after our solitary confinement in our prisons, right? So this is fantastic, seeing all of us. So good afternoon, welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm George Hidalgo, Club President, and thanks for joining us today. So as I open the meeting today, I want to just talk about how great it is to see so many members. So as you can see, let's go ahead and give a clap for everybody who's here. So it's fantastic. People I haven't seen in 16, 17 months, so it's fantastic really seeing all of you. So as you look around, we're probably over 100 people, so we broke 100. And if you remember, we used to be at 235 is what we average at these meetings, right? Now we're doing the crawl, walk, run, as we discussed before, and initially we started 2 people per table. So this is a big step. We're now at 5 after 8 weeks. So you should be proud of the progress that we're making as we get more comfortable with meeting in person. So, but one of the things as you look around and you see people that you may be missing, right? Some friends that aren't here, okay? So they may not even know that we're meeting, okay? Because people travel all over the place and they may not have email address and things along those lines. So I would encourage you to think about those friends that aren't here right now. When you go home or back to the office, go ahead and send them an email or pick up a phone, give them a call, and just find out how they're doing, okay? And see if they're doing all right, how things are going. I know that we didn't lose anyone for COVID-19, so don't feel that it's going to be an awkward conversation when you call these people, okay? They're friends. Tell them that you care, you want to see them again. Invite them to come back to our meetings because that's really critical to getting us going back again in terms of connecting, as we connect, grow, and surf together. So the other thing I want to chat about a little bit shortly in a couple minutes is just your leaders have taken this pandemic year and taken a close look at our club structure because obviously, we've been challenged with the pandemic. It makes you reevaluate what's going on. And there are some changes that we've made to ensure the long-term viability of our club. So I'll talk about that shortly. So thank you for being here. And with that, let's go on to our opening music. And Casey Olkers will play This Land Is Your Land. Casey. Be seated, please. Thank you. So one thing I'd like everybody to think about, there's some people that are coming in right now. If you have an empty seat, just raise your hand and welcome them because it's kind of frustrating when you got a plate in your hand and you're looking around for a place to sit, okay? So please go ahead and raise your hand and welcome. There's tables up front, so, okay, great, fantastic. So I'm pleased to see that we have a few guests in the audience today, and I'll ask the following to please stand as I call your name. So we've got Chris Kolakowski. Chris, if you could stand, who's my guest. And then we have Jennifer Smith, who is the gift of Maria Alvarez Stroud. And we have Kathleen Conklin, who's guest of Alice Waller. Did you make it? Okay, no, missed that. And then Boo Mortison, who's the guest of Regina Milner. Okay, so let's give them a warm round of applause, and thank you for joining us today. Okay. Okay, so Wolf Brickman, guest of Will Sprinkman. Okay, great. Guess of, is it Trace Rinkman or who? Okay. Oh, Rodriguez, okay, because son of, okay, outstanding, okay. Thank you, welcome. So I apologize for that. Now remember, our process was we actually had a person that introduced, and sometimes with our new processes, some people we aren't able to capture them. So apologize for that. But thank you for joining us for lunch today. I appreciate that. A really good program. So one of the things I'd like to, hey, Mary, is there anyone else? Did I miss someone else or no? We got everybody? Okay, great. So let's go ahead and recite the 4-way plus test today of the things we say or do. So is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Yes, will it be fun? That's what we added this year, so outstanding. Thank you. So we were talking about going on to the changes, and I know that there was a lot of information that went out. Reference, your club board directors did not sit on their butts and not do anything. They were actually working on ensuring the long-term viability of the club, and so we want to share some of those changes that we have. So as you can see, we had the club leaders appoint 3 task forces on governance, membership recruitment, and retention. So on the screen, you'll see the club organizational chart. Now that starts July 1st, okay? We also have copies on the table so you can follow along. And again, the primary reasons why we changed the club organizational structure was to create better communications, have more continuity. Now, starting at the top, you see the board of directors and officers in the board committees that report directly to the board. So a little bit of different structure than what we've had in the past, but again, this is for long-term viability and ensuring communications and continuity. So we actually have what's called committees of the board, which you didn't have before, and obviously a completely different structure that we have set up. And part of the reason was we wanted to ensure that there was a lot of communication, and when our current structure that didn't occur. So one of the things that we did is we have the leadership team that consists of basically the president, the vice president. If you could expand that one, go on to the next slide. Okay, yeah, right there. So the leadership team consists of the president, vice president, immediate past president, and Pat Jenkins, who's executive director. So we haven't had a leadership team before, so rather than have one person, we figured that to ensure continuity over the long term, right? We have the current president, it'll actually change on July 1st, right? Because I'll be the immediate past president. And then Teresa will be the president, and Paul Hoffman will be the vice president, and then Pat will be the executive director. So we've actually been meeting on a regular basis to ensure continuity, making decisions as to how many people can we have, how do we process registrations. There's just a lot of things on the running of the club. We're not a 35-person club, so we're quite different. I think most people, just remind everyone, we are one of the top 10 largest Rotary clubs in the world, and there are 35,000 clubs worldwide. So this is a unique club because of the size and really the caliber of the members that are in it. So we have grouped the committees into 5 teams. And so we have a team concept now, and as you look at the organizational chart, that's across the top. And the reason we wanted to do that is just to ensure continuity and communication. So we do have a leader for each team. And our 5 team leaders are for meeting experience team, it's Deb Archer. For member experience team leader is Mary Thompson. For service team leader is Doug Dittman. Philanthropy team leader Charles McLymans, and youth service team leader Stanley Morales. So, I mean, we're showing the faces because those are the people that are going to provide the leadership for the club as we go forward on July 1st. So the bottom half of the organizational chart also shows the committees and how they have been reorganized within each team. Again, our committees do a lot of the work of the club and for the club. And we've gone from 41 committees to 25 committees. Now, you're probably thinking, what committees did we get rid of? You know, so some of them are subgroups, and it's designed to just be more effective and ensure communication. So that's the reason for the change. So going from 41 to 25 committees and having the team leaders hopefully streamlines the communications. So as we go forward, we will have the strategic plan committee that will monitor the process and we'll look at any changes, evaluation to ensure that we maintain the membership. And bottom line is we're here to really serve our community. So how do we do that better? So we'll make adjustments along the way. And if anyone has questions, I mean, and this is really involved. If you have questions, don't throw your arms up in the air and give up, okay? Basically, there's a lot of people here that you can ask. So you can ask myself, you can ask the Rotary office, you can ask any of the board members. So if you're a board member, raise your hand, right here. So we've got several board members here. So ask those people. They've been involved in the conversations. So there's plenty of people that can answer your question. And if we can't answer your question, show you what's changed or what your club is doing and the whole structure, we'll ensure that you get an answer. So I think, again, it was really key for communication and continuity of our club. Normally a 500 would drop down 419 because of the pandemic. We expected 400, so we actually did better. But now we got to rebuild our club size back again because the stronger our club is, the better for our community, okay? So we connect, grow, and serve, right? And the more people we have here, the better it is for us and the better it is for our community. So it's really key. So with that, let me go on to the next thing, which is the Madison Rotary Foundation officers for next year, and we'll have Martha Vukolich Austin serves as president of our Madison Rotary Foundation this year, and she has an announcement. Martha?
Good afternoon. It's so nice to see everybody, and on this lovely day. I wanted to tell you that the Madison Rotary Foundation trustees held their final meeting of the current Rotary year last week. At that meeting, Treasurer Joel McNeil shared the exciting news that our foundation market value is now at $16.3 million. If you want more information about that, we can share it with you, but our funds have done very well, and I'm sure it was all because of Joe. Also at that meeting, the slate of 2021-22 officers was announced. Since it was a hybrid meeting with about half of the trustees attending in person and half on Zoom, we held the election of officers electronically. So I'm pleased to introduce you to the 2021-22 Madison Rotary Foundation officers. Dawn Krim, who is our current vice president, will be our new Rotary Foundation president as of July 1st. Doug Dittman was elected as vice president, and he will automatically become president on July 1st of 2022. The following officers, yes, he deserves a applause as well. Thank you. The following officers were reelected: Pat Jenkins, secretary; Joe McNeil, treasurer; and Dave Dukow as assistant treasurer. I want to thank these members for serving as officers for our foundation for the upcoming Rotary year. It's been an honor to be the virtual president of the foundation over the last year. At our meeting last week, I was one of the people in person, and it was the first time I'd actually spent time with some of the trustees at a table, so that was pretty exciting. I'd like to thank all the trustees that have served and officers for their service to the foundation and to the club. Thank you.
So thank you, Martha. We appreciate your service as the Madison Rotary Foundation president. I guess we go down the history as virtual president, so that's unique. We're in the history books, right? So there's a positive there. We'll be memorable for that, right? So let's go on to birthdays. So we have birthdays celebrate, a little bit of humor and wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. So we also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to $100 for our Club Synergy Scholarship Fund. So June 14th is Dave Scher. June 15th, Martha Casey. June 15th, Melissa Fellows. June 16th, Tom Fox. Also June 16th, Kathy Poi. And June 17th, now Linda, I'm gonna ask you to stand up because you are here. So you can't hide, okay? So, and this is sharing my post-COVID resolution, socialize with compassion, kindness, and grace. And I love your source, a quote from Yogi Tees. So that's fantastic. June 17th, Dick Goldberg. June 19th, Ralph Kegley. And then thanks to our celebrants for the contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation. Please join me in wishing them a happy birthday. And Jeff and Angela Bartell will sing happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you.
So on to the announcements. I'd like to let members know that Grace Chosey's husband, Julius, passed away on June 10th, and we extend our sympathies to Grace and to their family. On to members in the news. So we've had some good news. It was late breaking news. Now, I'm not a golfer, but is there a golf course around here called The Bridges? Anybody know? Is that true? Is that the name of it? Okay. So this came to me like 3 minutes ago. So we have a member named Gary Peterson since 1990. Right? He's been a member of our club, and he actually got a hole-in-one about 5 minutes ago. So is there a picture of it? I guess I don't golf. A hole-in-one is a big deal, I would assume, right? So when you see Gary, give him a hard time about that, okay? That's fantastic. And we want to congratulate Tara Graves, who was listed among the winners of Independent Bankers 40 Under 40, 2020's Emerging Community Bank Leaders Competition, Independent Banker. So Tara, you're here, right? Yep. Okay, good. Thank you. Then Carl Gutnick placed second in the 500-meter running event for the National Veterans Golden Age Games hosted by the Madison VA Hospital. Okay. Then Greg McKells and Floyd Rose were quoted in an article about broadband and what it will take to get rural and urban Dane County fully connected, and that's Capital Times 6-9. And then we have Darren Harris. Darren, I know you're here. There. Wrote an article for the Dudgeon Monroe Neighborhood Association about home ownership and encouraging residents to review several new initiatives for building black wealth, and that's DMNA.org, summer 2021. And then Bridget Frazier was quoted in an article about Wisconsin Youth Symphony Orchestra plans to build a $25 million, 40,000 square foot music center on the 1100 block of East Washington Ave, and that's Wisconsin State Journal 615. Again, it's fantastic. I mean, for those that are wondering who our members are, and as leaders in our community, so it's important to always ensure that you stay in touch with what's happening in the community, because we do play a vital role. So thank you to our members for doing that. So on to our program. Now, we held our monthly board meeting of the year, actually our last board meeting for me, at least as president, because I still got another year as immediate past president. And our thanks to Paul Hoffman for hosting our meeting at Monona Bank. Now, for those, we're pretty transparent, so if you want to see what transpired at our board meetings, all the minutes, everything is on the member login page, of our club's website. So we also asked one board member to introduce a speaker each month. And this month, Lynn Sexton will make the introduction. So Lynn is Chief Executive Officer of Grace Hospice Care. She has been a member of our Rotary Club since 2013 and is her final of a 2-year term on our board. I'll turn over to Lynn to introduce today's speaker. Lynn?
O-H, whoever just said that, you better respond. Whoever said go Bucks as I get up on the podium is, asking for trouble. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I could say something, but I sure won't. Thank you, President George. He's so good at reminding people to be courteous. Well, thank you for that introduction. And good to see everyone. Glad the crowd is getting a little bit bigger every week. It's super exciting. Our program committee has scheduled a series on this topic of high-speed internet, otherwise known as broadband. And for a lot of us that live in the Madison community, we kind of take this for granted. But you go just 15 miles outside of our city, and it begins to fall off pretty quickly. And in fact, when you look across our country, we know that folks that live in more urban and suburban areas, 97% of those folks have access to high-speed internet. But when you go into rural communities, that drops all the way down to 65% have access. There's a lot of work going on in the state of Wisconsin to kind of address that issue and reduce some of the disparities that it creates. Things like helping people have better access to virtual health care, increasing local businesses' ability to use high-speed internet, and so on and so forth. Our first speaker in this series is Brittany Beyer, and she's titled her presentation, Rural Broadband 1, The Economics and Relationships Needed for the Fix. We have two more speakers coming in on this similar topic, and they'll discuss other aspects of broadband. Brittany is the Executive Director of Grow North Regional Economic Development, which serves several northeastern Wisconsin counties and partners with Wisconsin Economic Development. Brittany, we look forward to your presentation and have made a contribution to Rotary International's Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking with us today. I also want to mention to everyone, time permitting, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. If you have a question, wait till the microphone makes it to you. So, in the meantime, let's welcome Brittany to the stage.
Thank you. I have the advantage of being really tall, so I have to adjust this. Sorry. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me here. This is actually my first trip out of the North Woods in over 15 months. And I had been, thank you. I had been traveling to Madison, Milwaukee monthly for the past 3 years in my role as the executive director of Grow North. So this is a really great experience to start things off. But just to explain, I am the director of Grow North Regional Economic Development Corporation, and so we do economic development in the North Woods. So you think about tourism in that area, right? But there's a lot more. So we strategically work on workforce housing, workforce development, and right now broadband. The ball was rolling before COVID really happened. In July, I believe, June actually, of 2020, it was announced that the Commission on Blue Ribbon, the Office of Rural Prosperity was designed to have the Blue Ribbon Commission on Rural Prosperity, and I was named as one of the commissioners on that. One other thing that was happening before COVID was also that there was the desire to have something that was happening in Minnesota, which was a task force on broadband. And the governor's office really understood that there was a linkage between rural issues with broadband and broadband in general. So they were really interested in having somebody from that lens of the rural perspective be also as the chair as well. But to talk a little bit more about all of the work that's happening in the state of Wisconsin right now on that task force of broadband. So the governor did name in July of 2020, after things were rolling and you really felt like broadband was really coming to the top of the list of things that was really becoming a crisis point inside of COVID. He created the task force at that point in July of 2020. But subsequently this year in his budget report, he also named 2021 as the year of broadband access. And you're really going to see a lot of attention on this issue if you have not already. The task force had 25 members. We were meeting monthly. I will also say that it was all virtual. So I actually have the the great award of being a virtual chair on this as well. So I've never met in person many of the 25 task force members, but we had to really find common ground on such a really important issue. And we really dug into different areas, policy and funding, mapping and data, community network building, because there are relationships that need to be in place for this to work in rural communities, but really, really important equity issues are really baked inside of this as well. So today I'm going to talk about some key issues, and I really do want to prioritize Q&A because I do believe it's an issue that a lot of people want to talk about. You will hear, if you talk to people, mapping needs to be more granular. And I'll kind of explain what people really mean by that. Funding has to be in place to make sure that we have the infrastructure put in place. And then to solve this, there are relationships that have to be in place on the ground in rural communities that make such a large task happen. We'll talk a little bit more about the size of these grants, but think about rural communities and how they can handle such work. But I'll leave you with one thing that really will be inside of the report, but it's talking about access, affordability, and adoptability. So we talk about those as the 3 A's, and those will really give you some action points. So starting with mapping, this is a snapshot of the FCC's mapping, which the PSC uses. So this is a common element when people are trying to figure out their problems. The blue tells you that it is at a speed which we all think is broadband. So it's 25 down, 3 megabits up. We found inside of COVID that 3 up is too slow to do video conferencing, let alone have multiple people in a household doing the same work at the same time. So that definition, which is coming from the FCC, you'll see start to shift up just naturally. So first of all, that blue may not be the speed that we want. So here's a couple of problems even inside of this map in the first place. So the FCC maps allow the providers that are using the space, if they service one location in a census block, they can claim the whole thing. In rural communities, that becomes an issue because the census blocks are much larger than it is in an urban setting, right? So census blocks are really tight in urban settings. They expand very largely when you get into areas that are less densely populated. And so that's one of the major issues. The providers also have the right to name the highest prescribed speeds that are available, and there's not a way to test that in place. And so they can claim to give a certain speed, and then if you talk to those on the ground, because of the different technologies, you might not actually be getting that. And so that's where we have the little bit of a disconnect. So I'm going to shift the perspective just a little bit. So population density versus that FCC and PSC map, right? So those denser populations obviously are Madison, and then it widely varies. If you go to the eastern and western southern quarters, you're talking about 23 people per mile. And that's where it gets really hard to make the case that you are going to spend millions of dollars in infrastructure build out unless this is a real necessity for the way that we are living our lives. After COVID, we now understand that broadband is this 21st century essential service, and that is where the picture is really changing. I will also say, as somebody from a rural community, we were trying to articulate that this was starting to shift. It was no longer talked about as a luxury, but I would reflect back to 2019 in January. Remember when we had that week of deep freeze? One of our local school districts surveyed their families to see if they could do remote work for that week. 35% of the families didn't have connection, period. So even in 2019, they knew that they were going to have a problem with something. They didn't know COVID was happening, but they were already investigating the problem. So on mapping, The FCC is currently refining their mapping. In 2020, Congress went back to them and said, you have to solve this faster. And that's happening right now. But one of the things that I like to think about is what is the layers of mapping that are freely available that just have to uniquely be overbuilt. And so we are looking at some of what's happening in some of the counties inside of Wisconsin. Iowa County is doing fabulous work on this, and it's a collaboration between their extension officers and GIS professionals. And I will talk about that a little bit later. There is a very, very defined part of the report that will be coming out because we have the report going to the legislature by the end of this month. So it's in edit form. It's really close. But there is mapping and data recommendations from that side. And then from the economic development side, if you are in touch with MadRep in this area, they're really keeping an eye on this as well. So talking to them in any way that you can, you'll understand what they're trying to do for the rural areas. So moving on to funding, and you may or may not know some of this, but in the previous budget cycle, $48 million were allocated for grants, and the PSC oversaw that. So as of December, they went through all $48 million. They are doing fabulous work in the state. So at the moment, there is a current cycle open that is for $100 million, and that's actually flowing through with ARPA dollars. And so there are, this is one of the most, this is the first time they're working with these new federal guidelines, so the speeds are actually increasing as we just saw, right? So it has to be programs that are 100 down and 20 up at least. So just a little bit on the current budget cycle. The governor put in $151 million in grants for the two-year cycle. He also called for line extensions, and in rural communities that would make a big difference. There was also a line for technical assistance in rural communities that would make a really big difference. As of this morning, I have an email from what the Joint Finance Committee is really interested in doing. They want to take $125 million in bonds and use that as the granting underwriting. Bonding is a very interesting way of thinking about this, and I want to posit that this is actually moving it into a public good, which I think we really want to understand a little bit further. And then just to keep an eye on something that's happening at the federal level, how many of you have heard the acronym RDOF, or Rural Digital Opportunity Fund? I live in a very geeky space. So RDOF is the FCC program that's about to start, and there were two major winners in the state of Wisconsin. There are smaller pockets, but for Dane County, it's actually going to affect the southeastern portion a little bit more. In my literal neck of the woods, it's a large part of what we're going to be keeping an eye on, because the density of the RDOF winning areas are going to make a real difference in how we're approaching the problem. So the cost of closing this gap. There is not a number for the state of Wisconsin that I can pull, but I will go to New Mexico. They actually are one of a very small handful of states that did a comprehensive state-level broadband plan to really understand their issue. They looked at it in a couple of different tiers of closing the gap. Is it fiber optics to a certain degree, and then fixed wireless, and had different tiers. Those dollar amounts go from 1.7 to 5.1 billion to close it in that state. I'm going to posit to close the gap in the state of Wisconsin, if we were to do it in the most future-proof way, it would be in that range. So think about that, and think about how we need to assist rural communities in being partners inside of closing this gap. But I would also say something really interesting. This is a map of the USDA rural broadband grants that are out right now. On the very up to the right side is Wisconsin. And you can see it kind of comes off as gold, so very rotary colors. The gold portion are the grants that are out for application. There are no applications for USDA rural grant broadband projects in the state of Wisconsin. Speaking to our USDA representatives, we underrepresent the broadband grants that are going out from USDA rural. I would say it's because of the size. And because it would probably not be done by a tiny town or a municipality, it has to be done at a larger level. They're usually around $3 million, but there's a match. And so having the ability to put those pieces together is a financial capacity that a lot of small municipalities don't always have, and we have to be really cognizant of that. But I also think that there's room for public and private solutions inside of this. I'll lift up Brown County, which has Green Bay, so there's a large anchor inside of it, but it does go rural very fast. They have 120 miles of fiber optic cable inside of the ground that they put there. Most towns and counties are not looking at that, and that was actually as a cost-saving measure, because otherwise they would have to be leasing out service from a provider who had existing broadband infrastructure in place. So we need to help communities understand that they can solve the problem that way. You'll hear a lot about municipality broadbands and co-ops. In some situations in rural communities, that's really not an option. My example is this. In the town of Eagle River, there's an electric utility that is municipality owned. They have great broadband. They don't need the service. It's Lincoln, the town above them, that has horrible service. And there's no way that the city members are going to be interested in having that electric utility service an area without any return. Besides the fact that moving into a new space is a very, very risky business. And then also, it's just outside of their scope. So some of that doesn't necessarily work in all of the rural communities. There's other ways to approach it. So we still all have to advocate for continued state grants. There are conversations about should this be in the general fund. Obviously joint finance is saying that it's going to be coming out of bonding. But in the very least, this is a long-term issue that is going to have to be solved. I will posit that a lot of rural communities have fixed wireless as their option. That's another geeky term, but that equipment needs to be replaced in 5 to 7 years. So then you want to think about what's going to happen in that next layer. Technical assistance I brought up. We'll talk about that in a little bit later, but this is where philanthropy walks in. All of the grants take a local match. And so let's be very creative about where that comes from. Who knows what CRA credits are? CRA credits can be used for broadband. So I'll go through network building. So in 2020 in the fall, WEDC and the PSC ran a pilot to see if local communities would need some assistance in what they could do. They had the application open for 2 weeks. 96 rural communities applied. So that really tells you the overwhelming need for it. It's not a month that it was open, it was just 2 weeks. 6 communities were selected, and the cycle of the pilot was a little short, but what we really are looking at is what's happening in Minnesota and Iowa. They're doing very similar things. I'm going to raise an example that is working on our side. I oversee 8 counties, and all of my counties are starting to really take the leadership role inside of their local broadband problems. Previously, they have not had to have that as a skill set for any person in their administration of the county level. So you're asking people to do new things. They need support. So Grow North, we bring them all together. Actually, we're just starting this process, and we answer all of their questions and get them resources. But there's a missing layer. There are 9 regions of economic development, and there's 9 regions of regional planning. Both sides have a little bit of a touch point inside of broadband. We're bringing them together and talking about what we can do. There are already wins on this side. So I would, again, say my counties are starting to think a little bit long-term. Counties that are doing comprehensive plans are really benefiting from that first move. One of the first things we as a regional committee will be doing is really digging into RDOF, making sure that all of the barriers are removed, because that federal program runs for 6 years, and we don't want them to stall out and take 6 years to do the work. We need it as soon as possible. And then the 9 regions, again, that example of Iowa County, we had those representatives show all 9 counties what they were doing, because what my background has a little bit of a dabble inside of innovation thinking. And in innovation, innovation happens at the edges, and you take the edge and you put it in the middle and you systematize it. And that's exactly what we're doing. It's very fun to watch. But there's also a couple of statewide features that we're trying to purchase for all of the state to just move this along. And then, so let's go over the 3 A's. So access, infrastructure is not there, the cost is really high. Affordability, the cost is too high because of income or because of the connection. Basically, satellite is very expensive. A lot of families can only use that and they can't afford it. Adoption, that is very important, and we saw that with at home education this past year as well. And there's ways through in this, so the access, it's grants, it's making sure that those networks that we were talking about are really supported, and really making sure that the eye stays here on COVID, because we need this to be solved. I was just reflecting, so Tesla won the bid for the World Fair in 1893. Electrification happened in the 1930s. Broadband became the inkling everyone knew in the mid-1990s. We're in the early 20s. So we're actually ahead of the curve if we're thinking about that dissemination from the last century, but let's push it a little bit faster. Affordability, how many of you know that there's actually an FCC program right now called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, EBB? So if you have, so if somebody's on SNAP, if somebody has free and reduced lunch, they actually automatically qualify. And so we need to be thinking about what is here. More choice, competition, drive the prices down in rural communities. If your only choice is 10 down, 1 up, is that really a choice? And that's what's happening so often in rural communities. And then adoptability. One thing you will see inside of the report is making digital navigators and having a digital opportunity fund, again, where philanthropy can move into this. So there are a couple of different ways that people can be part of this. Again, to prioritize questions, I welcome everyone to ask questions, and thank you. I think we're asking you to wait for a microphone, but we've got people over here.
You talked about Iowa County. Could you go into a little more detail about Iowa County?
Sure. The extension officer did a comprehensive survey on broadband needs, and they took that information and mapped it. They put on additional layers. One interesting one is taking all of the fiber permits that were sought for the decade past, and then mapped that onto Iowa County and put the name of the company so that they actually kind of knew what was going on in that area. I will give a little tidbit. No company has to disclose where their lit and unlit fiber is, so there's a lot of guessing games that happens. But so by having these additional layers that are put on, they're closer to being able to put accurate grants together and close the gap for people.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you about the financing part. You talked about partnerships that were needed.
Yeah.
And Wisconsin has a fantastic economic development tool called TIF.
Mm.
Is TIF able to be used for any of this, especially when you were talking about local
TIF
communities working together?
TIF is a little harder.
Thank you.
It's really like an investment tool in economic development, right? So we're asking a lot of communities to think about this more as infrastructure, so it kind of falls into a different thing. I would also say I have a lot of members in our region that are TIF adverse still. So it's really hard to use this tool evenly throughout the state.
Thank you for the work you're doing. It sounds like you're building equity, which warms a Rotarian's heart. That's nice. In talking about solutions, you use the term future-proof.
Yeah.
How do you know that what you're doing won't be out of date as soon as you get it done?
I can't believe I used that term without even thinking about it. So future-proof, meaning the reason why a lot of people talk about fiber more than anything else is because when you're in technology, you know the exponential growth part of this. So we were talking about speeds. You're going to start hearing about gig. In one conversation I was able to sit in on, so one of the FCC chairmen from the Obama administration said, we should be talking about gig now, 10 gigs in the future. If you do it properly, fiber optic cabling, you can do that and scale up no problem. It's when you are really depending on end users and using fixed wireless, which on a good day can get 50 down and 510 up right now. When you're thinking about the IoT, so when your toaster and your oven and your refrigerator are going to be pinging in, they're not going to be part of that world, right? So we're really looking at the increasing nature of technology being centered to our lives.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Beyer. I still don't understand the fundamental economic problem here. So I recognize we have staggering capital costs to install this. Then who's going to pay for it? Mm-hmm. And are rural people going to pay the same $50 to $100 a month that I pay for broadband service, for example, in the city of Madison? And just also, why do I have lovely, snappy service in the middle of nowhere in Vilas County?
What part of Vilas County are you in?
7183 Big Lake Road, halfway between Land O'Lakes and Boulder Junction.
Okay, well, you're close to the Charter fiber optic cable up there, so that's great. So they were able to build out there. It's when you go further into some of those subdivisions, like in Lincoln County, just south of you, actually, that it's and then we haven't talked about wireless cell phones. That's another layer inside of this. The long-term cost is also why. Personally, I'm saying fiber optic cables are better because there are companies that say they have the cables in the ground for 40 years at this point. So that return on investment is there. And I mentioned that fixed wireless, you have to replace it in 5 to 7 years. Who's responsible for it is a really big question, and we have to have a conversation about that and why it probably is important to have capital inside of the budget to do this maintenance for a long term. I'll give you an example on the pricing for you too. Reedsburg Electric moved into broadband early. And so Reedsburg is another place that has really great broadband connectivities, and they did such a great job that the communities around them said, hey, can we have that as well? And they had to do some cost modeling. So for the communities in the rural areas around Reedsburg, there's a $10 a month service fee in addition to what the Reedsburg people are paying to make that return on investment and expansion possible. In our Vilas County experience, Charter has the RDOF bids in the area. Charter's already there. I'm going to put my money on you having Charter, and they're going to do even more work. That's federal dollars that are being matched from them as well. And so we're trying to make sure that we're capturing the return in all of these different areas And quite frankly, one of the other things I work on in housing, and a lot of times in rural communities, they're not doing the type of investment that's happening here because the capital stacks are very complicated and they don't have the skill sets. So what we're trying to do is uphold these rural communities and build the skills to manage a PSC grant that's $1.5 million with a match. We're hoping they can get to the USDA level 3.3 plus a match. So it's, when you're talking about sizing, you know, these are normal Madison numbers. These aren't normal rural numbers. And that's where it becomes more complicated.
I guess coming from the Northwoods reminded me of the electrification folks coming into Crab Lake in the 50s and putting power in there. And then forward 30 years to the late 70s, I was in the uphills of Papua New Guinea, and I had the best phone call back home that I ever did because they didn't use wires, they did it with satellites and modern technology at that time. Every place else was really hard. I'm wondering if 5G is a solution for these urban or rural areas. They're in my rural area in Hollandale, there may be 5 or 6 farms within a square mile, and running cable would be tremendously expensive.
Right, and so that's where the end user, you'll hear people talking about being agnostic about the type of technology. 5G is probably great in rolling hills. 5G is not going to work in the Northwoods. The trees absorb the 5G, and it just does not work. So we have a different set of problems that you won't really understand until you get kind of deeper into solving the problem. Yes?
So I think many of us feel disconnected with what happens on the federal level, the state level, but we're here locally. Madison and Dane County, probably most of us live in Dane County. What is it that we can do to affect what's going to happen, say, in the budget cycles coming up in November with the county and the city, and how can we really make a difference?
One of the things a lot of times the active participants inside of this is going to be economic development. So check in with MadRep on what they're doing. And then what you can do locally. So what I really am a champion of active citizen participation, and it really matters in rural communities, and it definitely matters here. If there is an existing committee working on that in a specific area at a county, everyone can use another volunteer hand on this, right? So just be there. Clarify what's happening if there's a grant that they're going after, if you are of a philanthropy, how you can do a match at a certain level, advocating for some, like all the dollars we can get at the state level is really important. The infrastructure bill, I'm not even going to touch that at the federal level right now. But everyone is caging it in the conversation of infrastructure because it's the way and the pathway to get it done. And then I would just say, this is making sure to talk to somebody in a rural area and actually have the tough question about what they're doing, because quite honestly, a lot of them are coping. They're coping on this issue and other issues. So making sure that you're just checking in. And then, of course, we didn't even get into cellular. So, but thank you so much.
We have one more question from Brian Chan. Last question, please.
Hi, Brittany. Thanks for coming. So my overall question is, once you acquire all these grants, where does the money go, and how are you funding the actual expansion? And I have a quick comment. So here in Madison, we have the Muffin Network, which is 176 miles of in-ground fiber, which is running at 10 gigs and above, and also our wireless segments are going at a gig. And that's a consortium of various entities that are all pulling together. We meet every week to figure out who's building what, and we openly share our map files through the KMZ Google format. So I guess where is the money all going, and how are you guys going to manage that?
So I am not part of any of that grant management, being the chair. That's the PSC. So that goes to different, different communities and providers that do the application process. It goes to them, and it's a reimbursement process at the state level. So they have to spend the money, and it is going to infrastructure build out. And I commend you on what you're doing, because open sharing and really wanting to make sure that the growth is happening evenly is part of what we're hoping happens in the future. So I do applaud you on that.
So Brittany, thank you very much for an outstanding presentation. Let's give a round of applause, please.
Thank you.
So with that, thank you for coming here today. It is fantastic seeing all of you. We are adjourned.